welcome back to the Halo series. My name is Douglas Brown, CEO at Halo Consulting. Today we are joined by Jeff Bettinger, a Transformational Chief People Officer. If you're new to this event, Halo hosts monthly virtual roundtable events covering trends in the HR, tech, and DEI space. Don't forget to check out the Halo mini-series, where we hear from executives taking a deep dive into a multi-part series discussing what is keeping them up at night. If you've enjoyed this content, hit that like and subscribe button and sign up for our monthly newsletter, which summarizes current market trends and recaps past events. And that link can be found in the description. Throughout our session, we will cover best practices for success in building employee culture in hybrid environments. Before we kick off the questions, Jeff, can you share with our audience where you started your career and your journey and how it has evolved as a transformational chief people officer?
Well, Doug, I've had a pretty crazy career. I've had a front nine and a back nine. That's the way I kind of phrase it. My front nine was I was a teacher. I taught for about 15 years in private education systems and really loved that. Worked in administrative roles, but over and over again, I just kept seeing things through a business lens. And people kept saying to me, Jeff, you can really unlock more and more of your potential if you take a jump and go for the business world and go after it. So I made the jump. I started as a junior level recruiter, and through just a series of really great leaders that I've worked for and opportunities that I've, taken the risk on, I've been able to put myself in a position that now I've served as a chief people officer for 2 different publicly traded companies and have some of my own consulting work that I do as well on the side.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. Sounds like an exceptional career, and probably the impact you've made across several organizations can be still felt today. And really interesting to hear more about the front nine of your career, spending those 15 years in teaching, but we can save that for another time. Let's go ahead and dive into the first question, Jeff. Within the past couple months, we've seen a major tech layoffs across the nation. Organizations are starting to get flooded with applicants for these open roles. What challenges are you seeing today, and how can those challenges be resolved in the short term?
Well, I think, there's really 2 phases to that, right? There's the organizational side, and then there's the people side. I'm going to really focus more on the people side because I think that will be more interesting into those that are, listening, because, there are a lot of people being impacted, tens of thousands of people. I mean, just this week, another layoff round at Facebook with an elimination of 5,000 open roles, 10,000 people that are, now out of work. I have a brother that teaches at Stanford and lives right in that area, and he's got a lot of friends that have found themselves in this exact situation. And so, people are out there really applying for a lot of things. I've talked to several individuals who, I do a lot of career coaching on the side, and, they are really stymied right now because for many, especially those that are younger or newer to the workforce, they're dealing with something they've never dealt with before. There's always been this dramatic need for developers and different kinds of technology talented individuals, and right now with companies doing so much to reframe either who they are or how they define the work world, we're seeing a lot of people that used to be able to just sort of cherry pick whatever it was that they wanted and go after it, have to really start to work at it. And so a couple of things that I would say I'm seeing that are challenges is that people who are newer or younger in the workforce don't really know very well how to differentiate themselves and how to show why they are so different than the 35 or 40 other people who are applying for a role. It used to be that if a company had a position, they were sad that they weren't getting very many applicants. And now we're in the opposite, especially with remote roles where they're getting flooded with applicants. And so how do you stand apart? How do you put yourself in a position that you're the one that's recognized as a real solution for that organization's problem? And so, in the near term, what I would be telling people is you've got to look at your resume, you've got to look at your social media profiles, and you've got to figure out how you can position yourself to be the solution to the problem that an opening at a company is demonstrating that they have a need for.
Yeah, Jeff, that's some really great insight. Really put yourself in a position to be the solution of the problem and what you can do to really stand apart and again be recognized as that solution. Any kind of immediate tips or tricks that you can share for candidates that can do that might be newer to the workforce or kind of our younger generations.
Yeah, I mean, one thing is it's better to be working than not working. And so even if you're volunteering for a nonprofit or something that's a social cause that's important to you, you need to be doing something that keeps you engaged. And for whatever reason, hiring managers can kind of smell when somebody's not really employed or when they're not really engaged. So it's important for those who are looking to keep the sword really, really sharp by looking for, is there another language I need to learn how to develop in? Is there more code that I need to learn how to work on? Is there, other skills? We're seeing a lot of the layoffs happen in the support functions. And so finance, communications, HR, etc. So what is it that you can do with your time to volunteer that helps to show that you're giving back at the same time that you're looking for some sort of a solution? Then the other piece is you have to network, network, network. You used to not have to do that as much because there were so many jobs and so few people. But now that it's the reverse of that, what have you done in the last 24 hours? What have you done in the last 36 hours to reach out in your network and talk about what it is that you're looking to do and why you're targeting certain companies or roles in the job search that you're currently in?
Really appreciate that context, Jeff. Let's move on to the next question. There continues to be a constant struggle with creating a sustainable and positive employee culture amongst hybrid environments. What are a few best practices you can share with the audience?
When you think about the remote work world, you need to think about a continuum. And the elements of communication go from deeply interpersonal to very, 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 generic and multi-purpose. And the more remote an organization is, the more they need to focus on trying to stay to the side of the continuum that's deeply personal. And this is a challenge for managers when you're managing in a world where you're all in one spot. The challenge that managers have then is just, it's easy to be at your desk and get enveloped in what you're doing, and you got to get out and walk around. Well, you can do that virtually as well. And what we're seeing is that there's people who've lived and grown up in such a social world, in such a digital world, that it's easier to just engage with their computer or their text or whatever that is than interpersonally with people. A couple of different leaders that I've worked with over the few years that we've been in such a hybrid and remote work environment, they're always looking for the silver bullet that will help them to, control the employee's time or to control and measure the productivity of the employee. And yeah, there are systems out there that can do that, but the biggest and most powerful solution is an effective and impactful manager, setting clear objectives that are hard to reach, that are challenging, yet inspiring. But then, as a leader, doing as much as possible to engage on the most personal side. So, if you're working in a company that maybe is within a geographic region, maybe there's a monthly get together where everybody's coming together. Or if you're working in an environment where some days you're in the office, some days you're not in the office, there's things that you can do to check in with those who potentially aren't in the office those days. But it requires moving on the continuum away from the general town hall or the general newsletter and moving to much more intimate communications using tools like Slack or Teams or other, interactive, real-time communication tools that really allow you to engage. And that then allows you to really start to live and work on, building and having that cultural experience that you're looking for as an organization.
Yeah, Jeff, the one thing that you shared that really resonated is, as a leader, doing as much as possible to really engage on that personal level, and really moving away from like those newsletters, those town halls with, with a handful or all the employees, and really focusing on interactive tools that increase engagement across the board. Those are really some good advice. The next question we want to ask you, Jeff, is how can organizations make sure employees who work remotely and may not have as much interaction with senior leadership are successfully informed about the organization's values and mission?
Yeah, my educational background is all about communication. So you're going to hear that a lot because I studied so much in the space of creating organizational culture. And, you cannot really over communicate in a business. The challenge that we find over and over again for senior leaders is that they may communicate something in the form of an email or mentioning it once on a town hall, and they think that that message has now been heard and received and is understood. And what I constantly deal with as I work with really senior leaders is that they need to be using and saying the same message over and over and over and over again, and so that they can make sure that that information is both understood and felt throughout the organization. The Heath brothers have a great book called Switch, which is all about that idea of in change management or in communication, helping to link the head and the heart to what is going on. And so much about organizational culture is a heart business versus a head business. And so connecting to senior leaders really is senior leaders providing enough opportunities that individuals are getting that interaction, whether that's, small lunch mentoring groups to large town halls. And then the more two-way that those opportunities that you're putting together for your employees are, the more opportunity they have to then engage with the senior leaders. One of the things that I saw a great CEO do at one of my organizations was about half of a day every single week, he would just do pop-ins through Slack to be able to just pop in on different employees in the company to really take their pulse and to check in on them. And that meant more to them than anything else.
Jeff, the book that you mentioned, the Heath brothers, or the book called Switch by the Heath brothers, I have not read that book yet. I'm going to order it on Amazon, and I'll keep you posted on my thoughts.
It's a fantastic read, totally worth understanding, the connection of how to really communicate, and especially in times of change.
Awesome. Well, appreciate the recommendation. And Jeff, any advice on how remote employees should embody and demonstrate the organization's values and mission externally?
Well, I mean, a couple of things that come to mind just as we think about that. One is use the words that are the definitions of the culture. If you're not in your world using those words, it may be difficult for individuals to actually recognize that you have that skill and that you understand and are connected to those cultural elements of the company. And then as you think about the big why of the company, the more you do to post that publicly in social platforms or to emphasize things that coworkers are doing, whether that's through these great companies that really build out the awards programs that are tied to culture, and you're, giving people badges or points and recognizing what they've done within the culture, you begin to become a cultural champion for the company. The more that you help the company see that you are embodying those values. And even when you're, writing a communication, even when you're, interacting in a presentation, you may want to ground it in the beginning of the presentation in here's why this is important. Our cultural values are, entrepreneurialism. And because of that, I took it on myself to really look at this problem that we have as a company, and I want to present a potential solution. So now you're not just saying we have a problem and I'm going to help solve it. You're saying because of our cultural values of being entrepreneurship, I have taken the initiative to go out and figure out a way to solve the problem.
Let's pivot and discuss employee burnout. Can you share a few best practices that hybrid organizations can implement to address employee burnout while maintaining employee well-being?
Yeah, I mean, there's this always this balance, right, between productivity and the employee's well-being. First and foremost, what I'd say is you as the employee, you need to make sure you're really clear with your leaders on where your boundaries are and aren't. And that starts all the way from the beginning of when you're looking into the role to then how you're communicating and interacting with your manager along the way. Many managers, and I want to say most, but occasionally you find that individual that doesn't really understand how to be a great leader. But most managers, when they find out that their team members are under some level of emotional distress or burnout in some way, want to find ways to help their people to make it through that. And so I, start by being transparent as I possibly could with my leaders. And if I didn't have a leader that was someone that I could do that with, I'd be looking towards a coworker or another mentor within the organization. And if you don't have any of those, even though it's tough times, you may be at the wrong organization, because if they haven't put that into something that's important as a company to where managers and employees around you are worried about your well-being as much as their well-being, you may not be at the right place for you to really rise to the full potential that you can have. Now, once you're in that organization, you've got to look and talk to your HR teams, right? Maybe there's an employee resource program where you can get some extra assistance through either social programs or through counseling resources or other things that may exist within the company. But always, 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 you've got to keep a real good pulse on where you are and use those vacation days. So many companies have gone to unlimited vacation, and all the studies tell us that people actually use less. You've got to use the time. If you're not using the time, you're doing yourself and your family and those that are around you a real disservice in your own taking care of yourself.
For those in the audience that are listening, take Jeff's action and take your PTO and use that to recharge and really get a good sense of that work-life balance. From your perspective, Jeff, how can organizations measure the success of actions taken to build a positive culture in a hybrid workforce?
Well, I'd say there's probably 3 or 4 metrics you can really look at. I mean, the first, and it's a lagging indicator, but the first is revenue. Is the company doing well from a revenue perspective? Companies that are good at culture and companies that are good at, you know, building out success measures tied to that culture will see business results. They just will. So that's one way. But when we dive into more of the HR kinds of things, you're going to look at engagement surveys and you're going to look at your turnover. And within that turnover, you really want to look at your exit data. You can also take a look at, what's happening. And I've been at companies where we've done this. We've created dashboards where we're looking at Indeed feedback from former employees. We're looking at Glassdoor feedback from former employees. And we're really trying to get a picture of why it is that they were leaving us so that we can take steps to try and fix those issues in a much more rapid rate than maybe they were being addressed. But, it comes down to engagement. It comes down to what is that discretionary effort that employees are putting forward. And if they're hitting their targets, by the types of goals that are being set, you're always going to have a much more positive culture than if you wouldn't. But those are the kind of metrics that we're managing, we're monitoring to see if that hybrid workforce, and so you want to use a tool like Glint, let's say, or Qualtrics has some great, material in this. But you can cut the data and you can look at, here's my in-office populations, here's my remote populations. You can even then look at how many days was a person in the office and correlate that against their engagement score. You can play with that data in such magnificent ways that you can really start to identify trends. In one organization I worked at, we actually identified that there was a certain, our females that were working remote were having the most difficult time. And so we really dove into that data to understand why was that happening. And then using our employee resource group that was for working moms specifically, we went out with all types of resources for women in the company to try and help them find ways to be better connected, feel more attached, and also have that sense of, belonging that, we learn about in Maslow's hierarchy that's essential for people to really want to be able to realize their very best self.
What was that result, Jeff, for those working moms and getting them connected
Oh,
to the employee resource group?
I mean, we cut turnover in that group in 6 months by 20%. And, so by putting in an intervention, you can really solve something if you're attacking the right problem. So that you get that quantitative data, and the quantitative data is fantastic. But then you've got to dive into those focus groups and the qualitative measures to really understand what is it that we need to solve for. We know we've got a problem with, but now how do we solve it?
The next question we want to share with you, Jeff, in terms of succession planning in a hybrid workforce, how can organizations develop and promote talent from within the organization to build overall company success, especially in a hybrid workforce?
Well, one of the companies I was at, I think, did this the very best. A global organization, 60,000 employees, and every single month, the leadership team was meeting and they would review 3 key talents within their function who were on the paths of succession. And then that leadership group collectively worked to, and I'll use the word own, that talent pool to really help to build the successors within the company. And, that company has been very, very successful in the pipeline that it's created and the number of people that stay with the organization, because the company has added a rigorous process for monitoring and engaging with the talents who are on succession. Now, that's the organizational side. From the employee side, if you haven't made it clear with your manager and even potentially your manager's manager and potentially even your manager's peers what it is that you want for your career goals, it's very difficult for them as a company or them as leaders to look at you and understand what opportunities you may want next in your own career. So, there's really a two-part equation. We can create great systems in a company to look for the successors, but if you're not clear about what it is that you want to do and where you think your next step is, you may never be seen as a potential successor for a role because the company may have alternate assumptions about what your hopes and dreams are.
Any advice to the audience and those out there that might be at the manager or director level today and how they can better kind of present themselves to their boss and their boss's peers?
Yeah, I mean, one is rely on that group of individuals that are your boss and your boss's peers as mentors. And I'd be looking to have a lunch or a virtual one-on-one mentoring session with many of them multiple times a year. Probably no more than maybe 3 times in a year with each one of them. But I would be looking to them and really trying to feed off of their knowledge and their experience so that I could distinguish myself as a manager if I'm trying to become a director, or as a director trying to become, maybe a vice president or an assistant vice president. It's really important in that process to make sure that your career desires are really clear to all of them. But more importantly, they need to see that you're taking their advice, you're putting it into play, because then that helps them to start to see you as someone who really is engaged in learning and improving yourself and wanting that next step. All too often, someone may just put in the, company's HRIS system, like Workday or Success Factors or one of these kinds of tools, what their career goal is, but then they leave it there and they don't actually go out and build the internal network in the company to really show that they're hungry for those opportunities and that learning. The other thing that a high potential talent taught me years ago was raise your hand for the hardest, messiest mess that the company has. If you look for the hottest, worst fire and say, put me on that, that is one of the ways that I have seen people jump 2 and 3 levels in a very, very short amount of time because they're always willing to go after that really hard thing.
Yeah, that's some really good context, Jeff, and really, raising your hand for those tough fires to put out, really puts you in a position where you're interfacing and interacting with senior leadership on a regular basis. As we wrap up with our last two questions, is there anything you'd like to share or talk about in terms of the work you are doing today?
I mean, today I'm enjoying a little bit of time off, which has been really, really nice. But what I've been doing really is working with so many of these individuals who are finding themselves in a difficult situation that they're either not recognized at work and want to progress, and so they're looking for that next opportunity. Or I'm working with individuals who've been laid off from different companies and really helping them to position themselves in a much stronger way for those roles and those opportunities that they hope to achieve in their career. And so that's a lot of, the work that I do. I do a lot of leadership consulting and culture building consulting, that kind of a thing. But right now I'm just finding it so satisfying to help these individuals who are really trying to untap that next piece of their own growth and help them to maximize where they're going.
And Jeff, the last question we have for you, who should reach out to you and why, and what's the best way to connect with you and get in touch with our audience?
I mean, for me, I'd love to meet with people, love to work with people. The people that probably are the best to contact me are those within companies that are looking for ways to maximize the talent within the company. And individuals who contact me, those individuals are typically those who are high potential talents, who really aren't being recognized in the work that they're doing and want to find a way to the next role that's really going to let them unlock their full potential.
Jeff, thanks again for joining us on the Halo series and sharing your insights and perspective. Wishing you the best of luck the rest of the year.
Thanks so much. Have a happy day.